It has been said that if you want to make a small fortune in aviation, start with a large one. It's a punchline in the aerospace world, but in post-war Britain, it could just as easily have applied to sports cars, especially to one of the most curious names in motoring history, Fraser Nash. It was never a household name like Jaguar or Aston Martin. It didn't win the world's biggest races or fill dealership forecourts. And yet, it endured, across decades, across owners, across industries.
Fraser Nash began not as a car company, but as an engineering ideal, born in the sheds and cycle car clubs of 20s England. Its founder, Archibald Frazer-Nash, approached car design with the mind of an aviator. Minimal weight, mechanical elegance, and just enough madness to make it thrilling. His solution to the problem of gearboxes: chains, 4 of them. One for each ratio. No gearbox, just engagement levers and sprockets, like a bicycle built for racing. By the 1930s, Frazer-Nash cars were dominating hill climbs and time trials, their chain-driven systems snapping and clattering through the countryside, like industrial clockwork. But it wasn't just their oddity that made them special. It was their spirit. They were hand-built by people who didn't believe in compromise. After the war, something strange happened. The world of aviation and automotive engineering collided again, this time through AFN Limited, the company behind Frazer-Nash, and a new partner, BMW.
Their war-battered inline-6 engine, the 328, was reborn in Britain, refined by the Bristol Aeroplane Company, and slipped under the bonnets of a new generation of Frazer-Nash cars. These new machines weren't just eccentric, they were fast. At Le Mans, at the Targa Florio, on racetracks and in private garages, the chain was gone, but the DNA remained. Aerospace precision, built for drivers, not markets. And yet, they never made money, not in volume and certainly not in profit. So why did it all keep going? Why, decades after the car stopped being made, does the name Frazer-Nash still echo at Goodwood, or whisper from the side panel of a Porsche dealership?
This is the story of Britain's most eccentric car maker. A name built not on numbers, but on principles, where aviation ideals, mechanical brilliance, and sheer bloody-mindedness collided in a garage and gave us one of the most unusual legends in motorsport history. This is Fraser Nash.
Before we get started, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the algo find and share our message. If you'd like to keep up to date with everything light and fast, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It's free, so you'll get to stay up to date with all our videos, live streams, shop tours, and documentaries. Now back to the video.
To understand the mind behind Frazer-Nash, you have to wind back to the dusty roads and makeshift garages of 1920s Britain, a post-war world still finding its mechanical feet.
Archibald Frazer-Nash wasn't just a car builder. He was a tinkerer, a racer, and an inventor. One of those engineers for whom convention was something to be questioned, not followed. He began his career with the GN Cycle Car Company, short for Godfrey and Mash. These were light, inexpensive machines aimed at a Britain that craved mobility after the First World War, but had little money to spare. The GN cars were spirited and mechanically fascinating, and Frazer-Nash carried that spirit with him when he left the company in 1922 to start building cars under his own name. Thus, Frazer-Nash was born. The new cars retained a peculiar quirk. They didn't use a traditional gearbox. Instead, they used chains, 4 of them. Each chain connected a different gear ratio between the engine and the rear axle. By sliding a lever, the driver would engage one of these chains at a time, physically selecting the gear, like picking a tool off a shelf. This wasn't just eccentricity for its own sake. The chain drive system was extremely lightweight and allowed for remarkably fast gear changes in skilled hands. It also let Frazer-Nash build cars with near-perfect weight distribution and a direct, unfiltered driving experience. And it worked. The cars were fast, especially in the tight, twisty world of British club motorsport, hill climbs, sprints, and short-circuit races. There, lightness and agility triumphed over raw power. Fraser-Nash cars became known for their responsiveness, their quicksilver handling, and their unforgiving nature if driven carelessly. They didn't suffer fools, but those who mastered them loved them deeply. By the mid-1930s, Fraser-Nash was a staple on the British racing scene. Cars like the TT Replica and the Ulster 100 gained reputations as giant slayers, able to outcorner and outbrake much larger, more powerful rivals. The cars weren't beautiful in the way Bentleys or Bugattis were, but they had a brutal, purposeful charm. The sort of look that tells you it was built not for showrooms, but for stopwatch battles on forgotten country lanes. But even as their motorsport star rose, financial sustainability remained elusive. The chain drive system was clever, but not suited to mass production. Every car was practically bespoke. Every customer had to be a bit of a mechanic. And by the end of the 1930s, the automotive world was moving on. Then came the war. And when peace returned, Fraser-Nash would be reborn in a new and very unexpected form. One that owed as much to German engines and British aircraft factories as it did to chain-driven dreams. When the war ended, Britain was filled with engineers, machine tools, and ambition, but short on money and materials. Many car makers simply folded, but AFN Limited, the company behind Fraser-Nash, had other ideas. Rather than returning to their old ways, they looked to the future. The chain drive system, charming though it was out, and in its place came something far more refined, the beating heart of a German sports car. During the war, Allied forces had discovered one of Germany's best-kept secrets, the BMW 328, a car with an innovative 2.0-liter straight-six engine, featuring hemispherical combustion chambers and a cross-flow head. It was a marvel of pre-war performance engineering. The British took the blueprints, the engines, and in some cases, the engineers themselves. The Bristol Aeroplane Company, yes, the aircraft manufacturer, was tasked with reverse engineering and producing the engine for civilian use. The result was the Bristol 85C engine, a slightly reworked version of the BMW 328's power plant. AFN acquired these engines, and with them, a new lease on life. The post-war Fraser-Nash was born, not chain-driven this time, but still light, fast, and brilliantly engineered. These new cars combined British chassis know-how, German engine technology, and aviation-grade precision. The most famous of these was the Fraser-Nash Le Mans replica. Sleek, low-slung, and deadly quick, it was a purpose-built competition car. And it didn't just look the part, it delivered. In 1949, a Le Mans replica finished third overall at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, beaten only by two factory-entered Ferraris. Other successes followed, the Targa Florio, the Mille Miglia, and numerous hill climbs and endurance events across Europe. The new Fraser-Nash cars were never meant for the masses. They were built for racers and enthusiasts. Each one was tailored, hand-assembled, and fiercely individualistic. But what united them all was this. They carried the soul of a pre-war dream into a post-war world. One where the lessons of aviation and war were now being applied, curiously, to the art of building fast cars. The 1950s were Fraser-Nash's finest hour, and also their last. The Le Mans replica, the Targa Florio, the Mille Miglia, these weren't just trophies or destinations. They were battlegrounds, where Fraser-Nash proved it could fight well above its weight. Competing against giants like Ferrari, Maserati, and Aston Martin, the little British marque carved out a name for itself, with nothing more than skillful engineering, great drivers, and a fierce independent streak. In 1951, the company secured a class win at the grueling Targa Florio in Sicily, one of the most dangerous and celebrated road races in the world. That same year, Fraser-Nash cars competed across Europe, often driven by privateers who believed in the brand's raw capability. Names like Tony Crook, Ken Wharton, and Mike Hawthorne graced the marque's history, if only briefly. Fraser-Nash cars were never easy to drive, and they weren't easy to own. But for those who connected with them, there was nothing quite like it. Every car was practically tailor-made, with hand-built chassis, and the brilliant, rev-happy Bristol engine under the bonnet. The company also continued to develop new models throughout the decade. Cars like the Targa Florio and Sebring maintained their competition edge, while the Continental represented a more road-focused evolution, still sporting, still potent, but slightly more refined. But behind the scenes, the economics were grim. These were cars built in tiny numbers, for an exclusive group of enthusiasts. The post-war British car market was becoming saturated, and more mainstream manufacturers were offering speed, style, and reliability at a price Fraser Nash simply couldn't match. Bristol, too, began shifting focus, and with it, the availability and affordability of their engines. The supply chain was fragile, the customer base was limited, and the margins were razor-thin, if they existed at all. By the late 50s, production slowed to a crawl. AFN Limited was no longer just a car maker, it had become the official UK distributor for Porsche, a new rising star from Germany. The future wasn't going to be chain-drive nostalgia or bespoke racers. It was going to be air-cooled, rear-engine, and Teutonic. And so, without ceremony, Fraser Nash production quietly ended. No dramatic final model, no last hurrah, just a quiet fade into the background of British motoring history. But as we'll see, that wasn't the end of the story. When the final Fraser Nash rolled out of the AFN workshop, it marked the end of a chapter, though not the end of the story. Though production had stopped, the cars themselves refused to be forgotten. They became cult objects in the hands of enthusiasts and collectors, vehicles with personality, grit, and history baked into every panel. In the decades that followed, Fraser Nash cars were resurrected, not by factories, but by passionate owners. Restorers, racers, and vintage purists took these rare machines to heart, keeping them running, racing, and roaring at historic events across Europe. Goodwood, Silverstone, and the Mille Miglia retrospective became new battlegrounds for cars once thought consigned to memory. And then, there was Tony Crook. A former racing driver, and one-time Fraser Nash champion, Crook had helped guide AFN through its post-war years. When production ceased, he didn't walk away. Instead, he became the face of Porsche in Britain, overseeing the brand's rise through AFN's dealership network. But even in this new chapter, the Fraser Nash name never fully disappeared. It remained on paperwork, in registry offices, and most importantly, in hearts. Fraser Nash, unlike most marques, was never diluted through mass production or badge engineering. Its legend grew because it stayed rare, untamed, uncompromised. It became a symbol, not of commercial success, but of integrity, of craftsmanship, of doing things the hard way because it felt like the right way. Today, only a handful of Fraser Nash cars exist. Fewer still remain in working condition. But when one appears, whether at a hill climb, a concours, or thundering past at Goodwood, it stops people in their tracks, because it stands for something lost in modern motoring. The belief that a car can be more than transportation, that it can be an idea, a challenge, a legacy. The story of Fraser Nash isn't about what was sold, it's about what was built, and what was believed. Even now, long after the last Fraser Nash rolled off the factory floor, the ghost of Fraser Nash can still be heard in whispers from Fraser Nash Consultancy and Fraser Nash Research Limited. These companies are steeped in tradition and the culture of engineering research. Who knows whether the ghost of Fraser Nash will rise, like a phoenix from its ashes, but it is safe to say that the Fraser Nash name will never truly fade away.